Hello, you are very welcome to the second edition of HealthTech for Patients, organised by HealthTech for Care and coming live this afternoon from the Hub Institute here in the heart of Paris. Wherever you are in Europe and around the world, thank you for joining us this afternoon at this very important event for patients. My name is Alison Monroe. We are absolutely delighted to see that there are over 350 people from over 32 countries, 2/3 in Europe and 1/3 outside of Europe, who are online with us today. And you're right, because if you are keen to listen to and interact with distinguished international experts and key players in the role of digitalization, to learn how digitalization is improving patients' access to care and bringing real benefit to patients, well, this is the place to be. To open our afternoon, it is a great pleasure and privilege to welcome the driving force behind HealthTech for Patients, the president of HealthTech for Care, a renowned figure in health innovation, and a serial entrepreneur in health tech. It is a pleasure to welcome Marie-Yvonne Hyans.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the second edition of HealthTech Innovation for Patients. It's a great pleasure and great honor for me to welcome you to this event organized by HealthTech for Care and dedicated to patients. The goal is to put the patient into the center of initiatives using patient data to better respond to their needs. Sharing health data on an European scale is fundamental to improving citizens' health and care. The recent pandemic situation has highlighted the value of supporting this use of these health data and the setting of regulation to healthcare ecosystem. A coordinated use of healthcare would benefit to everyone. In this context, the aim of HealthTech for Care is to inform the global ecosystem of new approaches to improve patient access to care and develop faster solutions without patient at the center. We are joined today by international experts to exchange on patient access to care to innovative technologies. I would like to thank you, everyone, for coming and wish you a fruitful afternoon. And I now have the pleasure of handing you over to Christian Policard.
Thank you, Marie-Yvonne. Good afternoon. As Marie-Yvonne just said, HTIP mission is to help patients to have access faster and cheaper to health solutions when they don't exist. What is important is when it does not exist. Our way to do it is to put at the same place, this place, even if it is virtual for you, all the actors needed to achieve our goal. So patients first, and patients at the end, but in the middle, scientists, clinicians, biotech, medtech, e-health companies, large health companies, pharma companies or others, medtech companies, investors, because we need money to develop, public authorities, because they need to decide, and again, patients to receive those new treatments. This afternoon, we shall have an introduction from the European Commission, the policy officer, in fact, himself, digital health, in charge of digital health. After that, a first roundtable on digitalization, so new methods to improve patient access to care and develop faster solutions with patients. A second roundtable on point-of-care technologies for patients. So decentralization from diagnosis to treatment is very important to decentralize to the patients, tools, markers, technology, parameters, various parameters. And we hope many questions from the room. I have a big news for you. This event is free of charge, but your payment will be by asking one question per people. So it's very important. And so we hope we'll have more than 350 questions. Perhaps not the time to handle them, but it's very important that you ask questions. Now, before starting, this event is already a success because we have more than 350 attendees, so 50% more than last year, the first event, from more than 30 countries, 42 countries, 1/3 being outside Europe, 2/3 from Europe. We have a long list of journalists to communicate on this event. It's very important to have this event communicated to everybody around the world. So, we hope that the content of this event will please you and will teach you what has to be done to improve the quality of health. Now, I have the honor to welcome, in French, Ander Elustondo Jauregui, Policy Officer, Digital Health of the European Commission, to introduce us a new draft of regulation of the future European health data space, released just 2 weeks ago. So it's a very recent event, very important event, and I transfer to him the speak.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you also for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you also to HealthTech For Care for organizing this event, which I think is very timely, indeed, as you say, as the proposal for regulation was just adopted a few days ago on the 3rd of May on a proposal for a regulation for the European health data space, that I will be providing a very short introduction to it in my presentation. Just to double check, can you see my slides now? You should now be seeing them full screen. Could you please confirm? Hello?
So do we have the slides for Ander for his talk this afternoon?
I'm sharing them, but I don't know if you see them.
I think they are coming through in a moment. So as we said, we've had, while we're waiting for the slides to come through, we've got over 350 people joining us from right around the world, which is absolutely incredible. And as Christian said, that's taking us 50% higher than last year's first edition. And we do have a very exciting program this afternoon. We have people who have come from Jerusalem, from Belgrade. They have all decided to be here with us this afternoon at HealthTech For Patients. So let's see if we are getting our slides through from the European Commission to listen to the policy officer, Ander Jauregui.
Otherwise, I can also start my presentation without the slides. I can briefly
Please go ahead and
talk through it.
We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, so yeah, so the first
slides.
thing, you can
Please
see now.
Please go ahead, it's lovely. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So as I was mentioning at the beginning, and as you also mentioned at the beginning of this introduction, indeed the proposal for a regulation on the European health data space was just adopted a few weeks ago this is quite an important milestone in the area of digital health in Europe, because it's also quite a comprehensive proposal. It includes elements related to the access and control of patients over their own health data. It also covers internal market elements related to electronic record systems, for example, but it also goes beyond the use of health data for the provision of health, and it also covers further uses of health data or the reuse of health data, secondary uses of health data for research, policymaking, and regulatory activities. I think it's important also to mention that this data space doesn't exist in the vacuum. It's part of a wider, broader strategy. It's part of the European data strategy, which was unveiled by the Commission in 2020. But of course, the European health data space is the main sector-specific regulation which builds also upon horizontal proposals such as the Data Governance Act and the Data Act, which were also released earlier. So I think it's important to mention those as well. When it comes to the scope and the objectives, of course, the main objective is to make a more effective use of health data, pursuing the goals that were also mentioned earlier, to make access to healthcare more affordable, more accessible, and make access to health innovations faster, etc. But when we go to the scope, I think it's important to mention that it has two big pillars. One is the use of health data for the provision of healthcare, and then we have, as I was mentioning, the elements related to the rights of citizens, which now go beyond what is there in the GDPR as a horizontal data protection initiative. And then we also cover elements that relate to the internal market. Of course, I think if I mention problems related or challenges related to accessing your own health data that is generated in the healthcare system, I think you're probably aware of that. If you are a health innovator, you're probably aware of the challenges of, for example, marketing a product in another member state, for example, because of the use of different standards, different regulations, etc. This proposal is trying to address some of these issues. There, for example, you can see the mandatory certification for electronic record systems, which establishes a level playing field for interoperability requirements and cybersecurity or IT security requirements. There's also the European Electronic Record Exchange format, which already builds on the experience of MyHealth.eu, the existing infrastructure for the exchange of cross-border information of patients, to go beyond that and also to extend it to other domains and other uses. Then the second pillar of the proposal, as I was mentioning before, relates to the reuse of health data. I think this is also important for innovators, researchers, because now the idea is, and this is what is included in the proposal, to establish health data access bodies in all member states. We see these bodies already exist in several member states, such as, for example, France with the French Health Data Hub, or Finland with Indata, but there are also others. These are health data access, these are health data entities that would allow for access to health data to third parties which have a valid permit for the reuse of such data. It also defines the purposes for such use and the forbidden uses. And it also talks about the secure environments in which data could be processed, because of course the aim is to allow for this reuse, but within strict environments, with strict safeguards. And this should facilitate research and innovation, but also policy making and regulatory activities. Just to mention one, for example, when the EMA or other regulatory agencies, when they conduct pharmacovigilance activities. So there are different building blocks here. The first one is the legal and governance aspect. This is the one that is covered by the proposal, but of course there are other elements that will be implemented down the line through funding activities. But this will come later on through funding provided by EU4Health, the health program of the European Union. Just to give you a very quick overview on the user perspectives. So I was mentioning at the center we have data and the systems that use health data, so electronic record systems, data registries, but also health applications, medical devices, and then we also have the interaction with the medical devices regulation. And around it we have different stakeholders and different users which benefit from different perspectives, for example, with citizens or patients having a more direct access to their health data, with healthcare professionals also having access to their health data, the health data of their patients, particularly in the context of cross-border healthcare. So when the citizen is, or the patient is receiving healthcare in a member state that is different to the member state of affiliation, but also on the right-hand side, you can see other stakeholders, regulators and policymakers, as I was mentioning, but also innovators and researchers. I think cybersecurity and data protection, I think it's important to mention these two elements, which are very present in this proposal for regulation. You can see here different elements. So it builds on existing cybersecurity legislation. It also focuses on cybersecurity and interoperability, for example, when it comes to the certification for electronic health record systems. There are also security audits included in the infrastructure for the cross-border exchange of health data, not only in the context of primary uses, but also secondary uses. Strong authentications for patients and health professionals and so on. And I think for secondary uses, I think it's important to mention the secure environments. These environments, these virtual machines which will allow for the processing of health data in a secure way, and that would not allow for the for personal health data to be downloaded, but rather the results for non-personal data. I think this is quite important to also provide trust to citizens and provide trust to patients, so users would not be able to identify individuals through the infrastructure that is put in place for their reuse. And just to finish, I will present these slides very, very quickly. So this is a slide that refers to the current infrastructure for the exchange of health data across borders. This is a service that already exists, but is also part of the European health data space, because it's important that we go beyond the current rollout of services, and that we go for a full deployment across member states. And the aim is, of course, to have all member states joining by 2025, and to also extend the data domains that are provided or that are included in the system, as currently it is focused on patient summaries and prescriptions, but then the aim is to gradually extend it to other domains. And finally, just to mention the health data at the EU infrastructure, this would be the new infrastructure that would connect health data access bodies with research infrastructures and also other regulatory agencies, which would allow for a better use and reuse of health data at the European level. So this was my overview of the European health data space. I hope this was useful, and I'm looking forward for the questions. So now the floor back to you, to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anders, from the European Commission, for this overview to begin our afternoon. And of course, we are very keen to hear your voice. Your voice counts. We'd like to hear your opinions and, of course, to receive your questions, which will be discussed and answered by our panel of speakers this afternoon. You can join the discussion at the hashtag HTFP2, and of course you can ask your questions in the question section on the platform. After each round table, we will be sending out a survey to hear your feedback, to know what you think, and we would ask you to take those moments to fill it in and share with us your opinions. At the end of the event, there will also be a quality satisfaction survey, and tomorrow there will be the replay up on YouTube. So, our first roundtable will begin in a few moments. Please stay with us. You are watching HealthTech for Patients. Our first roundtable dives into the fast-moving world of digitalization and how it can bring faster solutions to patients. Our engaging panel of speakers will be moderated by a specialist with vast experience in international research management. She is the network manager at the CEBR and expert reviewer at the European Commission for research-related topics. She is also the co-founder of the social innovation company ClickLab. It is a great pleasure to hand over to Anaïs Lecorvec.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So I am the lucky moderator of a great panel. So I have three wonderful panelists with me today, and also one online. Michelle, a pity you could not join us, but I'm sure it will be a great to have you discuss. So I will introduce each and every one of them just before they start talking, but just a brief overview. What are we going to discuss today? So we're talking about the new method to improve patient access to care, developing faster solution. We will have 4 different points of view on that, and I will insist also to our speakers, how do we involve the patients in that, and how are they in all the development of the solution? I think it's quite important, and we're in this journey all together. So basically we will hear about how industry, academia also are developing solutions for and with patients in the digitalization. So, with no further ado, I will introduce our first speaker. He's our keynote for the session. So, Michel Goldman, he is the founding president of the I3H Institute, so the Institute for Interdisciplinary Innovation in Healthcare at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. He's professor emeritus in immunology at ULB. He's a member of the Royal Academy of Medicine of Belgium and editor-in-chief of Frontiers in Medicine. Michel Goldman also served as the first executive director of the European Innovation Medicine Initiative, IMI. and the partnership, which is the partnership between European Commission and the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries. So Michel, the floor is yours, and thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you to you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I understand that my role is really to set the scene for what will be, I'm sure, an exciting roundtable. So what I will try to do is to highlight some of the key steps and challenges for the complex journey which goes from basic research discovery to new therapeutic solutions reaching the patients. At the end, it's about turning innovation into patient benefit. And as you will hear a bit from me and from the other speakers, of course, much more in depth, artificial intelligence and digital health are really key during this journey. Now, let me go rapidly to those key steps, starting from basic science. I think it's very important to realize that, at least in the field of biomedical sciences, of course, you need freedom, imagination to leave the best research scientists in basic laboratories to do their job. But it's very important that they realize that when they find something, they have a moral obligation to do everything to facilitate the transfer of their discovery of basic research into new therapeutic solutions. And this means that they have to be careful, for example, in terms of protecting intellectual property before publishing. Then obviously comes the key steps when the discovery is there and protected to develop a business industrial approach to develop those therapies. And I think that there, the point I would like to make is that it's very important from the very beginning to have the patient concerns in mind. And this is not always done, and I think that this is very important, especially for certain types of diseases, such as rare diseases. Now, in this phase of industrial development, what has to be done is to make sure that the drug candidates are safe. That's the first important condition, and then efficient. And there also, it's very important in this process to take the patient perspective into full consideration. The patient is in the best position to indicate what matters to her or to him. And it's very important to define the objectives of the clinical trial according to patient outcomes, which are defined together with the patients. It's the same about safety. It might be that for certain therapies, patients are ready or even willing to take some risk, and we should not necessarily prevent them of doing so. Then, of course, if the first data are positive, it's important to engage into clinical trials which are required for regulatory approval. And there also, it's very important that patients are engaged and are considered. Now, what's very important to realize that it's not sufficient to have an efficient and safe drug, to have it approved, it must then be accessible. And as you know, access to innovative drugs is still a challenge, especially in terms of drug pricing. And there it's very important that indeed patients continue to advocate to ensure that they have access to the drugs they need. And this is obviously especially true for unmet medical needs, and there are still many of them. Now, this roundtable is about digital health and artificial intelligence. And I would like just to briefly discuss the role of digital health and artificial intelligence during the the journey that I just briefly described. First, basic science. AI might be very important in the discovery of new drug candidates, and there are a number of tools, for example, high-throughput screenings, in which artificial intelligence might be essential. And the best demonstration, recent demonstration, has been the discovery of baricitinib, which is a drug which is now approved in certain situations of COVID-19 infection, and it was really discovered through artificial intelligence. Now, I would like also to mention the importance of artificial intelligence, digital health in the conduct of clinical trials. We need new clinical trial designs. You know, the classical randomized control double-blind trials, they are still the gold standard, but they are not adapted to all current needs. Now, we need to establish patient cohorts differently. We have to be more, we have to assemble more homogeneous cohorts, and we have also to design new type of trials. For example, the adaptive trials, during which you can actually change the drugs that patient received according to the first results, and also the so-called basket trials, in which patients with different types of cancer, for example, but with the same type of genetic abnormality, will be enrolled in the same trial. And I can give you other examples of sophisticated trial for which we need bioinformatics, we need people with this view on digital health and what digital tools can bring. And it's the same to monitor the efficacy and safety of drugs. We will hear about the different tools that we have now for connected health. And I'm really sure that those tools, including, you know, smart watches and other wearable tools, will be essential not only in the follow-up of patients, but also in the conduct of clinical trials themselves. Now, it's essential to integrate during trials all the data that are coming from different sources, and it's there also that digital approach, algorithm, AI is critical. So I will, I think, close this short introduction here and insist on the fact that we need to educate a new generation of healthcare providers, not only doctors, but also nurses, other people involved in the care of patients, as well as patients themselves. We all have to learn, you know, how we can leverage digital tools to improve our health and to improve the way new therapeutic solutions are developed. I will stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Michel, for your intervention. I think it gives a great first overview of what we're going to discuss a little bit more in detail with each of our panelists. So with no further ado, I'll pass it on to Mohammad Asfar. He's the CEO of Ariana Pharma, expert in artificial intelligence. He founded Ariana in 2003, a leading pharma tech company focused on developing advanced therapeutic decision support system using its KEM, so sorry I'm not explainable artificial intelligence technology. I'm sure you will explain to us a bit more on that. Previously, he was the founder and director of drug design and IT at RiboTarget in the UK, leading digitally driven discovery of non-anti-effective in oncology molecules. He held several positions also in academic institutions, including CNRS in France. So, Mohammad, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. So I'll try to be brief and to the point and follow up on the excellent introduction that we had. I'd like to start my piece of the presentation, really focusing on on oncology and looking at some of the shocking figures today that we're confronted to with as people that are on the drug development side, but also as individuals, as patients. And this is that once we get to the metastatic stages of cancer, the outcome can be dramatically poor, and this is despite the fact there are hundreds of drugs that are actually being on the market, and there are thousands of papers that are being published. So our goal at Ariana is to aim at changing this and improving these statistics. Now, obviously, the underlying problem comes from the diversity of the population. This is the heterogeneity of the patients and also the heterogeneity of disease. So the key is to try to match the right drug with the right person. Now, the first attempt has been using DNA and information on a number of drugs and going towards the DNA-based precision medicine. And today, what happens is that once you go through the first and second line of therapy, the patients are then conveyed to a molecular tumor board to try to select the next therapy. The reality today is that for about 20% of the patients, a precision medicine therapy can be suggested, and unfortunately, for 80% of them, we don't have an adequate solution. So what we've been trying to do is really to change that paradigm, and the first thing is to increase the amount of information that characterizes the patients and the drugs using, first of all, RNA expression. So that suddenly just increases the breadth of information available. In order to integrate all that data, you need machine learning, and in particular, you need explainable AI, and I'll give you an example of what that means. And all of that, then translating that into a simple, actionable report that can be then used by the oncologist. Now, going beyond the drugs, you can also start including here nutriments into the equation. So the current product that we're commercializing through a company called Omicure has components on existing therapies as well as nutrients that could be beneficial in the diet of patients. So the first steps in validating our approach have been quite encouraging. One of the first things that we've been doing was to just look at, can you integrate RNA into a decision support system and compare it with what we would consider the standard of care on molecular therapies using a DNA panel, which was done comparing with Foundation Medicine. So on these various histograms on this slide, on the left-hand side, you see that the system allows us to access more drugs. So that's a good thing. The second histograms shows that we have more genes that are characterizing the patient. So all that is the, I would say, it's the means. This leads to the center histogram, which says that we can then come up with suggestions for all patients rather than a small group. So that's again moving in the right direction. And finally, what we're seeing is that it's impacting also the overall survival of patients, which is incredibly encouraging. However, the numbers are small. So this is a first clinical trial. The results are, again, very positive, small sample set, and we're now moving forward with follow-up clinical trials again to really just make sure that we get more and more both clinical and medical economic validation of this type of approach. I'd like to say just one word about the explainable AI piece. Now, a lot of you have a lot of activity around AI, and most of the AI that we are exposed to uses neural nets or other numerical deep learning methods, etc., where you integrate a lot of data into a black box model, and you come up with a predictive model which says, exposed to a patient, is it a yes, is it a no, or you get a score, and that's it. The difficulty with these type of systems is that it's very hard to explain why you have reached that decision. So if you want to get the clinicians and the patients to understand the decision, that becomes much more complicated because you can't explain why. Now, the other feature of the data in the type of systems that we're interested in is that the data is particularly wide. So you have relatively few patients and a lot of data about them. So you may have, as a small group of 10, 20, or a few thousand patients. However, for each patient, you have all the DNA, you have 26,000 genes, X number of variants, you have the RNA, you have the same number, you double that, you get the microbiota data, etc., etc. So very quickly you get 10,000 and thousands of dimensions to that problem. And that's where explainable AI becomes extremely important. We've been focusing on logic-based methods and collaboration with a laboratory in Montpellier at the CNRS, developing these type of techniques which come up with explainable models where for each prediction, the machine can say why, what was the relation that I've seen, what feature triggered that decision, and can even go back and say what were the examples, who were the patients I had seen with similar features that led me into this kind of decision. So if you look at this whole space of explainable AI, this may be one of the spaces where the AI is actually, on the method side, is improving and increasing the potential impact of AI in the different drug discovery, drug development, and therapeutic decision support spaces. So just to conclude, I would say that we've started with this model of expert system or AI that replaces the expert, etc. And the impact of that kind of AI in health has been relatively poor so far. However, we're gradually moving and turning things on their head, where we're moving toward system for experts and AI for the clinicians that enable them to do better their job. Stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good with the time and a very nice presentation. So now I get it better on the explainable AI, and I think that's really important. Also, a very shocking first slide. We discussed it just before. It's hard to see, but it's the reality. So thank you for bringing it up. Our next panelist is Johan van Beek. So I'm sure I'm not saying the name completely right, but so Johan is the head of medical science and digital biomarkers at Biogen Digital Health, so Biogen. For the last 6 years, you have been interested in investigating how digital technology may drive the development of evidence-based solutions to improve outcomes of people with chronic neurodegenerative diseases. So you've gained a PhD researching the role of neuroinflammation. Yeah, I have a good resume here. So neuroinflammation in multiple sclerosis. And during more than 20 years spent in the industry in various positions with Lundbeck's, Serono, Merck, Roche, Biogen, you've focused your research on developing drugs for the treatment of multiple sclerosis as well as on digital health. So Johan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So as you realize, my talk will focus on multiple sclerosis. I've been involved in multiple sclerosis research for the last 25 years or so. And I would like to focus my talk today on remote patient monitoring. Also really in the context of the changing healthcare landscape. So one of the opportunities of digital health is truly the data that are being collected by patients through their smartphones and smartwatches, for instance, at some point may merge with their data that sit in hospitals or with their doctors. Altogether, I think it is expected that those data will provide a better picture of the disease status and hopefully will also lead to more personalized care and better patient outcomes. So today I would like to focus on remote patient monitoring using consumer technology, so mostly smartwatches and smartphones. I will give examples of scientific validation of sensor-based digital outcome measurements in multiple sclerosis especially. But I also would like to discuss potential barriers and drivers to adoption of those tools in the future. So why is it that I was mentioning the changing healthcare landscape? I think it's pretty clear that during this pandemic, we have seen how technology is changing the way care is being delivered to patients. And I just want to briefly mention telehealth, because this has also changed completely the way patients are being managed. Very specifically in the field of neurological disorders, there has been attempt to perform a neurological exam through a virtual visit. So imagine a neurological exam which usually takes place in the clinic, which consists of a neurologist examining a patient performing tasks. Well, a lot of hospitals have tried to move this towards virtual visits. So there's been challenges and limitations, especially performing the neurologic exams when you think of the assessment of sensory function or motor strength or even vision. This can be somewhat quite complicated. I think it's very important as well to remember that when it comes to technology, some disparities in access to that technology still exists. Having said that, virtual visits, still require that the care teams stay very close to their patients. It's very important that patients are fully briefed so they really understand what to expect during those virtual visits. What truly accelerated during the pandemic is that all the key stakeholders were brought together. Patients, patient associations, regulators, healthcare providers, medtech, pharma, all together started developing guidelines for the use of telehealth. The FDA also, for instance, has issued regulatory policies to improve access to biosensors and remote monitoring. There's been essentially as well key learnings implemented in those virtual clinics for patients with multiple sclerosis. So I'd just like to describe here very briefly a number of exams that are usually performed in the clinic. So what we call the expanded disability status scale is essentially a scale that triggers the neurologist to examine the patient. In the case of virtual clinics, the patient could be asked to self-assess himself, herself, through a web EDSS. Patients can be asked to time their own walking abilities. And there's also this one test that I'll come back to later, the 9-hole peg test. That is the gold standard to test upper limb function in those patients with multiple sclerosis. What I find interesting in this paper from this team at Barts in London, documenting their experience through virtual visits. What they were saying basically is that even though they were struggling a little bit to provide those tests through sometimes the physical version of those tests, they were clearly mentioning that in the future patients are likely to use smartphones to do this. And here I want to give you a couple of examples. What if indeed in the very near future the neurological exam was becoming patient-centric and was relying on objective measurements through smartwatches or smartphones. On the left side, you see some work by Valérie Bloch at UCSF, and she could actually show that just using sensors on the wrist, that's a Fitbit sensor, she could actually show that daily steps measured over 1 year were correlating with worsening in gait as assessed through in-clinic visit using gold standard measurements, which means that the Fitbit could potentially replace a gait assessment that are being performed in the clinic. On the right side, this is another test that's been developed by the lab of Bibi Bilekova at NIH. So this test is actually testing manual dexterity. So the patients are asked to keep a rolling ball in the middle of the screen of the smartphone. And this as long as the test lasts. And in this test, they could actually discriminate normal healthy control versus multiple sclerosis patients. So we started getting really interested as well in this and truly leveraging the sensors that are found in smartphones these days that have now reached accuracy and sensitivity that really enables you to test for a number of different performances. So we've developed a sensor-based smartphone app called Connectome for the remote measurement of a number of neurological functions that are pertinent for multiple sclerosis, but neuromuscular diseases as well, Parkinson's disease, and other movement disorders. This platform consists of patient-reported outcomes that are essentially digitized, but we have also developed a number of tests that patients can just also use through their smartphone, testing cognition. We're also leveraging vocal biomarkers. We have a number of tests looking into fine motor dexterity, gross motor function. And also importantly, when walking around with a smartphone in your pocket, there's actually a number of features and domains that can be tested, including gait, posture, balance, U-turn, and things like this. We can also leverage the passive data that are being collected through the smartphone. And very briefly, I want to show you a little bit the approach to validate those tests. So back to this one test that I was mentioning, the 9-hole peg test, where patients are asked to put pegs into holes and actually remove them back. This is what is essentially performed in the clinic. We could actually show that pinching balloons and drawing shapes on a smartphone actually correlates quite well with this gold standard test, so which means that those tests can be performed remotely by those patients. More importantly, from the 9-hole peg test, what you get is one single measure. It's the time to complete the task. But with the smartphone, you can really leverage the actual screen and measure hundreds of features that pertain to the interaction of the fingers with the touchscreen. So there's more work that is ongoing trying to deconstruct the intra-task features and try to understand how they potentially associate with specific features of the disease. So what I believe is really important is we have to accept that there will be a lot of different apps and measurements out there. There is a risk that this leads to confusion, right? So what we also started together with Roche, we started a pre-competitive research collaboration where we are discussing consensus of those digital outcomes, recognizing that there will be plenty of tools out there, but importantly, this consensus is needed clearly to enable consistent clinical interpretation, drive the acceptance and the adoption. What's probably equally important besides the scientific validation of those tools and the consensus are people with multiple sclerosis and patients in general ready to embrace remote digital monitoring? I think it's a very important question. You see on the graph on the left, I mean, patients with MS are pretty young. They use their smartphones like everyone does. But actually, the proportion of those patients that use their smartphone for the purpose of monitoring their disease is actually very, very low. So there's this interesting survey, which I actually show some of the output on the right side. When asked patients, what solutions they believe and what those solutions should provide to them, I think what's really important is that patients would probably contribute to data through remote monitoring if they are able to act on the data. I think this is really important. Also importantly, if those applications are and can be tailored to each of the patients, that's also something that is important. So what I'm also trying to say is that if you want those tools to be adopted, they need to be developed by the patients because ultimately those will be the ones using them. It's also very important to remember there's an interesting study that shows that the adherence on digital monitoring remains a challenge. And in this cross-study evaluation of more than 100,000 patients, it was shown the actual retention was only of 5.5 days. So I think it's fair to think that patients behave with their apps on their smartphones the same way we ourselves behave with our apps on our smartphones. I'll just finish very briefly going through this. I mean, putting the remote patient monitoring in the broader context of this changing phase of healthcare. I think in a couple of words, I think clinicians all agree that what is truly changing and driving healthcare change is the fact that patients are more informed than ever. And I think very importantly, clinicians recognize that in the future, it will be more of a partnership between clinicians and patients. Clearly, patients will be more empowered to take care of their own health, and remote monitoring could actually play a very important role to that respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joan. So during the presentation, I checked my posture because, with the application now, yeah. But anyway, I think it was very interesting and we can discuss a little bit more afterwards. By the way, I just remind all our viewers, please send your questions in because we have our last presentation and then we have the Q&A session. Sorry for that. So our next presenter is Karine Samamash. So she's the Strategy and Business Development Lead for Healthcare and Life Science at Microsoft France. She has over 20 years of experience in strategy and transaction advisory and consulting for large and mid-sized pharmas and biotech. She's also former VP at one of the leading clinical research and real-world evidence organization. And she is passionate, I'm sure we will talk about it, about artificial intelligence, deep tech, quantum computing, applied to improving healthcare systems and clinical research. So, Karine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First, I just want to say I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I think this is one of the first roundtable where we sit together with deep tech, AI, drug discovery, hyperscaler, Microsoft, and biopharma going into digital health, bioclusters. So we're all together, and if you take like 10 or 15 years ago, I don't think you would get a roundtable, of that with those profiles together. And we are all here to actually talk for the patients. So it's how technology is actually driving change across the healthcare system to bring better treatment, more efficient treatment for the patient. So I represent the hyperscaler, and most of the people are asking me, well, what are hyperscaler doing now in the health system? And I think that the slide that you see kind of shows you, where our position, what is our strategy when we think about patient. And I think the first message is that what we do is technology must be patient-centric. Just as we develop our products, our technology products for our customers, we want our technology to help the patient, to be patient-centric. And we kind of see the way we look at technology in the health, we think that we can drive, where we can go and have the major impact. And so those 4 boxes that you see, this is where we think that we can truly be a game changer in the health system. So the first box is really about patient care path digitization. How do we help the patient get the most efficient care path? When he is, from telemedicine to teleconsultation. We talked about, remote monitoring for chronic disease, or, this is where we think that technology can really help bring the patient and get him a better access and more efficient today. I just want to highlight, and this is something very much obvious, but it wasn't so much obvious for the hyperscalers when we started, is that population is getting older and sicker. So chronic disease is about to explode. We're all developing more disease. Pandemic, COVID-19, but we know that there will be others. So the systems, the healthcare systems are going to go under heavy tension. And this is where, how do we get access? How do we care for patients? How do we help them? This is where technology can really bring something positive to it. A second element that is key is that while we have a population that's getting older, we have less physicians. So we know that there is a gap in Europe, that there is actually, we're missing, I think in the next 10 years, we're going to be missing like millions of radiologists, of physicians. So how do we improve coordination and collaboration with those physicians that are going to be more and more stretched? Because you get more patients, but you get less physicians in the end. And this is where technology also can help, because by bringing more efficiency to the way they do their day-to-day business or work. I heard a percentage one day, someone was telling me that a physician was spending over 40% of his day on admin tasks. So just an example, now we have solutions like Dragon Ambient, which is speech to text, which makes it that, while the patient is talking, the physician doesn't need to take notes anymore. There's a machine learning that is actually transforming what is hearing into actually a written text so that he doesn't have to take notes anymore. And we know that for radiologists, this is much key. This is also an important thing. So this is where technology can really bring the best out of people, help to reach patients when they're located and they're sitting remotely, far from a hospital, and they have a chronic disease and they need to be monitored, but also helping the physician, giving them the tool to do what they're best at, which is treat patients. The second boxes that we believe is about digital imaging, and this is about developing tools around AI, like machine learning or deep learning, that are going to accelerate the diagnostic, understand the biomarkers, so, tumor signature, so that we can bring more faster diagnostic to the patient. And this is a critical element, because nobody wants, we were actually talking, nobody wants to wait 6 months or for a diagnostic. And if you can go up to the signature of the tumor, and this is very much powerful, and I think this is really what you were actually describing just before. One of the key areas, which from our point of view is the most exciting, it's the clinical research. It's bringing together all those data sets, between multi-omics, so genomic, proteomics, clinical data sets, all together to understand, the disease pathway. What is a disease mechanism, and then find the right molecule to actually cure this. And that is, for us as a hyperscaler, it makes sense, because to do this, you need powers, computing power, virtual machines, and machine learning. This is what we do best. So we're not going to be the ones that are actually going to be developing the new drug, or even the AI or the digital solution, but we are going to be bringing our best technology and virtual machines to actually enable that. And this is key, because we know that more and more we're going to precision medicine. So we are going towards, treating patients with a personalized treatment. And this is where research and multi-omics and bringing all those data sets together are key. The fourth and last box is something I'm very dear on. It's about, how technology is going to be helping to develop faster new treatments through developments, through clinical trials. And I'm very much, people that know me know that I'm very excited about decentralized clinical trials, about clinical research as a care option. So how does technology will help to develop faster customer, but also to recruit faster patients? Decentralized clinical trial really developed and increased in a very rapid way with the COVID-19, where we couldn't, patients couldn't go to the hospital, and we actually had to go to them, to their home, so that they could get their treatment during the trial. And what we saw is that it actually increased also the diversity and inclusions of those trials, because there is the statistics, which I think is quite scary sometimes, is that 80% of the patients that are enrolled in a clinical trial actually live 2 hours away from the investigator site. So, it just brings you to mind, the diversity and inclusion question is, if you do not live 2 hours from this investigator site, the probability to access a clinical trial diminishes. And that's quite interesting. And there has been some questions by the FDA on the fact that some ethnic groups, some social groups did not access those clinical trials because they were living far away. And this is what technology brings through these centralized and hybrid clinical trials, is the ability to actually treat those people that actually are living far away from those sites. Another example of technology here is we were talking about synthetic control arms, real-world evidence that is going to be replacing a control arm. That's also what, how data and AI can transform the way we develop new treatments in a much faster way. And this is what we think is really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karine. I think it gives us, it wraps up a very nice presentation from the four of you. And so now, if you agree, I'm just going to start with the round of questions because we're getting them from the audience. And if not, I have some questions too. And as you know, as a patient too, I'm really happy that technology has helped the whole treatment path. And obviously, it's not the same today as it was maybe 5 years ago. So in that sense, I'm really happy that technology is really improving our treatment. So first question maybe for Mohammed. Somebody is curious to know what approximate percentage of health tech AI is explainable AI at the moment. Do you have an answer?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be able to provide you percentages, but if you just do a Google search on first of all, on explainable AI, you will see that this is really the new frontier. There are lots of publications, etc. And the other thing is that if you look at the AI solutions that are out there today, image analysis, all sorts. I would say that almost all of them are using deep learning or neural nets. So I think there's and this is where I think there is this gap of in particular processes which are very well understood. You can develop a very, very efficient predictive system that does not need to explain what it's doing. It's just this is the result and that's it. You run with it. However, when we are in scientific discovery, and definitely drug development is a space where there are lots of unknowns, that's where you need to be able to interact with the machine, have a system that generates and ranks hypotheses, and that's when you need the explainable AI piece.
Thank you very much for the answer. Maybe for Johan, what does, it was a question, but I think, what does acting on the data mean? So you were talking about how patients and the monitoring system. So can you go a little bit deeper with that?
I think that means that the data need and the measurements need a certain level of validation. So we understand what they mean, and patients don't feel they just contribute to data to a data dump. We should be able to provide them feedback on their performance and trajectories, but also explain to them what this really means and how they can act on them. For instance, go see their doctor. That's really important.
Yeah, I fully agree to involve them actually in the whole thing. If it's just dumping data, as you said, we can do that on other things. And maybe for Karine, but also both of you, I would like to know. So someone asked about, could you talk a bit more about adoption, retention, and insertion within the ecosystem of patient, health professionals, payers, etc. So how do we bring everybody together, the adoption of the technology within the, I mean, it's a very broad question, but what would you say? What is working?
That's a difficult question. Thank you. And you're going to help me on that one,
I kept the easy one for you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the key element is to develop a technology that is user-friendly. And it's something that is easy to access, easy to use, that can be, that simple. I mean, you don't want to create another burden for the patient, right? So, for example, if we look at clinical trial, I mean, the burden of actually running and being included and recruiting a clinical trial is huge. So you don't want to bringing another layer, I mean, it's already hard enough. So I think that the one way to attract and retain patients when we want them to be using technology is to make it as easier and actually to demonstrate that we are actually, it's there to reduce the burden.
I think I would fully agree, and I would just go back to one of the examples that Karin was mentioning regarding image analysis, and we have a large collaboration with Philips and the APHP, and one of the things that in that collaboration, what we're trying to do is help the process that the radiologists are already taking, identifying features and linking that to aggressiveness of a tumor or whatever. So we're not trying to predict that for them, but just help them, in that process. So if we get closer and closer in streamlining that, then that's how we get the adoption. On some of the tools that we're developing now on the therapeutic decision support, I think that is a challenge. Currently, for example, our solutions are commercialized in the US. They are not commercialized, for example, in France yet. And there's a big hurdle of, first of all, of showing the clinical benefit from it. And I would say that's almost the easy step. But then you get into all the steps of showing that, you have a positive impact on cost, and that it's user-friendly, as Karin was saying, and that people can really integrate it in their existing process without including additional steps that they don't want to do, and by reducing cost. So the hurdle there is higher.
Okay, what about you, Johan?
I think this is a great question. I think as far as patients are being concerned, and when we speak about remote patient monitoring, what I showed is right now what's being tested is a lot of active testing, right? So we are asking patients to actively contribute to tasks. I think the future will be towards passive monitoring. There's a lot of research along that line. We are quite not there yet, but there's a number of activities around human activity recognition, for instance, whereby potentially walking around with your smartphone in your pocket, you could potentially extract U-turn patterns or walking patterns or gait patterns instead of asking patients proactively to do those tests. But I think this is what we're heading towards as the passive monitoring.
Thank you very much. And picking up on that, on the patients, so we have, I would say in the past few years or decades even, patient association have grown stronger, and maybe for companies, and now I think also about my let's say cluster hat, so we're in touch with them. From our company, we're in several research projects where we involve association of patients. How do you deal with that? So how do you make sure that actually the patients are involved? Who do you connect with in all those processes to really put them at the center? That's another nice question, huh?
Do you want me to just start on that, maybe just on for example on the oncology product that we launched? I think for us that was really the first point of entry into the system, has been through the patient associations, who have been our best advocates, pushing our system to their physicians, who then engage with us, and then we get into the various clinical centers, etc. So at least in the US, that for us that has been the entry point.
From a hyperscaler point of view, we kind of see things differently. Why is that? Is that we're not developing treatments or tools. We're just, or solutions direct to the patients. We're just providing those layers, those cloud computing, cognitive services to enable companies like Biden or Nate to actually develop their solutions. So we don't see it that way. We're just thinking our solutions so that we can improve the efficiency of those companies that are actually developing these solutions. So it's really more developing platforms to enable people to do their best science, which then will benefit the patients.
Do you want to comment too?
No, sure. I think, again, it's a question that applies to tools.
Absolutely.
I think one of the challenges with digital health is that a lot of solutions have been developed for problems that don't really exist. And I think we should rethink a little bit the way we do this. I mean, first identify the medical need and try to understand which tool could really make it through the patient journey and how this would like really play out within their treatment together with their treatment goals. So, I mean, obviously it's very important, and when developing those tools, you involve patients, and I think it's common sense also to do this through product development and user testing. It's not always a guarantee that this will work in the real life, but yeah, this is a key step towards good practice in product development.
Okay, thank you so much. And Michel, I know you're still online. I wasn't sure before, so I apologize for that. So I would like to have your comments also on that, on the patient involvement and how it's been evolving, because you have a great experience. So what would you be your take on that one? Oh, you're on mute, maybe. Does it?
I can hear you.
Yes, now it works. Perfect.
Okay, actually during my mandate at the Innovative Medicines Initiative, one of the projects I was really proud of was this European Patient Academy that we create to really engage the patients in partnership between industry and academia. And also we realized that on the top of this, when you have philanthropic organization involved, it also helps to keep patients at the center. For example, we had the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation supporting some of our vaccines project. Now, the point I would like to make following your conversation is the importance of education starting early on. And I think that the type of medicine we are talking about, which will take advantage of digital health, this is something that, you know, the children who are currently at school, I'm sure that we have to, they will be familiar with this type of approach to take care of their own health. But I think that this should be, in a way, prepared already at school today. It's all about health literacy. It's about people knowing much more how to take care of their health. The other key aspect is obviously education of the physicians and other healthcare providers. I think that their universities, academia, are still a long way to go. It's about teaching digital health, but it's also putting this in a broader context. Sometimes I'm afraid when I hear my colleagues of patients thinking that AI will do the job, that we will not need doctors anymore to make diagnosis and to implement therapeutic solution. That's not true. I think that really the dialogue between the physician and the patient, the physical dialogue, is important. I think that, you know, the empathy, the compassion is part of the job of the doctor. It helps people to feel better or even to cure. And this is something that we have also to teach to the new generation of healthcare provider, not to lose, you know, this critical aspect of the patient-doctor relationship. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Michel. I have another question for our wonderful panel. So, and it's related a little bit to what you just said, Michel, also. So how do we solve the gap between an older, aging, but also maybe poor population that is for some part illiterate, about digital tools and the increasing need for digitalization in society. So that's another very easy question for our panel. But I mean, what would you say? How do we do that? We were discussing this just prior, actually, about our parents eventually. How do they deal with digital tools, the mobiles, and you, Johan, you were mentioning about the application that could also be, for example, for Parkinson's disease. So how do we make them go on and using those tools?
I mean, it's a very complex question. I also mentioned this through my slides discussing telehealth. I mean, there are barriers to technology access, and I think we need to keep this in mind. So I think back to what we were saying, very importantly, keep the technology as simple as possible. I think it's also getting simpler and simpler, right? And obviously, as much as possible, as far as remote monitoring is being concerned, just try to use consumer technology as much as possible. I'm not sure this is a problem that is on the radar enough, unfortunately.
I agree. Karine?
I think there is one population we need to also to think about. It's not so only the patients, but it's also the families, les aidants, which are actually helping the patients. And usually when you, I mean, if we're thinking, population getting older, that means you're going to have more and more frontline workers like nurses or families that are actually going to support and help these patients. And so it's not only about educating the patient itself, but also educating and giving the tools and those solutions to those people that are actually helping the patient. And I think on the optimistic side, those groups are actually much more, will access more easily because they're a bit younger. I mean, it's not only about age, by the way. It's not always the age factor that's there, but I think it's giving also the technology to those group of populations that are actually helping the patient. That is going to be a critical factor, success factor.
Thank you.
I mean, I can only agree, and I think indeed, you have the two aspects. One is the access, which has been improved through the telemedicine and the availability of access, through technology, and the fact that indeed the more and more we see technologies that are becoming simpler for monitoring. You're mentioning the Fitbit. There are some insoles that you don't need particularly to know what they're doing. They're just doing their job. However, that second part has a cost, and that cost does create a barrier which would need to be addressed.
Thank you very much. I will go on to a question I think we addressed just a little bit about the data. So which would be one of the first steps for the patients to realize the benefits of data in their health? So I mean, this is something that is very relevant, and I've been, as I mentioned before, in ClickLab, we're in several projects, especially on rare diseases, and there's always a little bit also of fear in terms of where is my data gonna go, who's gonna use it, who's gonna have access to it. So what is your point here in saying, okay, yes, we need your data, or we need to use this data? How would you convince a patient that the data he can bring is important to improve his life? I mean, I'm clear on it. I know it helps, but how can we convince them?
Shall I start? I think that we're exposed to this in a number of projects that we have at different settings, but I think one of Karine was mentioning the use of real world evidence, for example, in clinical trials. If you think about it, ethically, just take for example Alzheimer clinical trials, very large, several thousand patients. Half of them are going to be exposed, or 1/3 of them are going to be exposed to the placebo. You look at the number of unfortunately failed clinical trials, you have tens of them. So does that actually, ethically, does that make sense to expose again patients to placebo when you have all this data? the challenge is that that data needs to be captured in a reusable way, etc., so that so that effort could be reused and as a real world evidence or synthetic control arm, etc. But I think that there's an effort there to make sure that we agree on how this data can be used, and it's effective. We can then show the impact, and that's how probably we can then get the buy-in from the patients as well.
I couldn't more agree to that. And one point is, I think there's the one thing that data is key on for is research. I mean, why are we talking about data? It's that it's the heart of the research. There's no research, there's no new treatment without data. So that's a given, and I think that nobody can discuss this, right? What the worry comes from is the loss, of control over my data. So I'm a patient, I just want to make sure that it's not going to be used against me or for things that I don't want to. And I think that we need, and as a whole, and I think it's the whole ecosystem, whether the hyperscaler, the startups, the biotechs, the biopharma, the research, we need to start educating and reassuring those patients that, we're doing this for them, and we're not reusing the data for something else. So I think there's really a lot of education, and I think this is where regulations and politics need to also be involved into this, is educating patients that, it's only for research, and they will be keeping the ownership of their data. I mean, it remains their data, and they can take it, they can give it, and then take it away when they need it. So they keep the ownership. That's the key point to me.
I fully agree with that. I think it's very important. Do you want to say something more?
I think that was all very well said, yes.
Okay. So maybe because we just have a couple minutes left, I would like to ask just a last round of one last sentence thought about what we've discussed today. So what is the future for you related to digitalization? If you have some good thoughts to share with policymakers, for example, what would you tell them? I know it's an easy question to end the panel, but to have your views on that, just the last.
Can I start? I think from what I presented, I strongly believe that the future of healthcare is outside the clinic, because a lot can be done outside the clinic. But this will, I think, only prove and bring value if the data can be integrated in the healthcare ecosystem. And this is the current challenge, actually.
Thank you. Karine?
I'm being attacked here. I think that, one of the key messages I gave last time is technology is there. I mean, there's nothing to invent. Technology, the machine learning, deep learning, we're all ready, and it's really about regulations. I mean, if we can get our regulatory system to move, in parallel to this technology, I think that we'll have made a big step here.
We have an analog fly with us today. Thank you. Okay, Mohamed, to finish.
I would just say that, I mean, just to continue that thing, I think, the regulation and transparency on data use and data access are going to be key. And again, transparency about how where this data goes, what do the systems that have been developed, what do they exactly do, and how do they impact our health? I think are going to be key.
Thank you so much, and I think we're actually super good on time. So Alison,
It's been wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Anaïs and Johan, Karine, and Mohamed. Plus our little visitor, because even the flies are passionate about health care and innovation. So thank you so much indeed for a lively and exciting first round table. We are going to be sending out our survey to ask you to give your feedback, to share your opinions before we move on to our second table. Now, we're going to take a 10-minute break to grab that nice cup of tea or coffee or whatever you like. Please take the time to answer our questions. That would be really, great, and we would appreciate it very much. Coming up after the break, of course, our second round table dedicated to point-of-care technologies for patients, and we have another exciting and distinguished panel of speakers. So please join us then. See you in 10 minutes at 14:40. Thank you. Welcome back to HealthTech for Patients. Please continue to respond to our survey. We are getting some fantastic feedback and we're keen to hear more. And also, please, using the hashtag HTFP2, please also use the social networks to communicate around our event this afternoon. Now, let's turn to our second round table. We are going to be focusing on point-of-care technologies and putting patients first. And to lead this roundtable with our selection of international speakers, we have a notable medical oncologist, expert in hematology, orphan diseases, and rare diseases with over 25 years' experience in the pharmaceutical industry. It is a great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Alan Herrera. Alan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alison. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, because as I understood, we have people from the different part of the world. And good afternoon to the panelists who will expose during this roundtable. So this roundtable is dedicated to point-of-care technologies for patients, as highlighted by Alison, and it will be dedicated to the transfer of existing technologies and tools to the patients. It will analyze the benefit derived from them, but also the potential issues linked to them. The first presenter, Anthony Montserrat-Moliner, who will give us a keynote lecture, is the Vice President of the Luxembourg National Committee for Rare Diseases, and he was previously responsible for the policies on rare diseases and cancer at the Public Health Directorate of the European Commission. Anthony will explain the legislative framework and what is needed to optimize clinical benefit for patients, but also analyze the regulatory barrier to be overcome to harmonize the development of new innovative solutions. Then we will have two speakers explaining which tools they are putting at patient disposal and for which potential benefit. The first one will be Ayala Blia, the CEO of Sivan Innovation. Ayala will present MoveCare, a medical application designed for lung cancer patients and able to improve survival in this patient population. The second speaker, Benjamin van den Driest, CMO of Bindflies, will explain how the Care at Home platform developed by the company capture medical daily insight and make them available to providers to deliver virtual care. We will end with Juros Bogdanovic from the International Diabetes Federation, young leader in diabetes, and Juros will testify how patients react and live in this new digital environment, what they are expecting, and with what impact on their day-to-day quality of life. So, Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alain, and thank you to the organization for this kind invitation. Okay, I have the strange task to explain a little, which is in a context as we are living in these post-pandemic times, what is happening at the level of the European Union in terms of regulatory process and others. Okay, you can imagine that maybe the years 2020 and 2021 in terms of legislation, in terms of action at the level of the European Union were times absolutely lost, times absolutely non-productive, but the reality is completely different. During all these 2 last years, we had, in terms of the health policy in the European Union, the most important changes in all the history of the European Union. Okay, it's like this. The Union probably needs a crisis for changing things. It was the case in '96, if you remember. In '96, the health policy in the European Union not exist. It was in '96 when, for the first time, a policy on health in the health area was adopted. Why? Because in '96, if you remember, we experienced for the first time a very important European crisis, the crisis of the mad cows. And it was thanks to the mad cows that the European Union discovered that something called health policy could exist at the level of the European Union. And of course, after the pandemic crisis, also the European Union discovered that not only a little budget that it was devoted to the health policy was not really productive, but that this budget needs to be multiplied practically 20 times. And that's a little the start of this new era that we are now experiencing. From one side, what is important to remember is that you should know that at the level of the European Union, it not exist policies for all the diseases. The number of diseases which are covered by actions at the level of the European Union are very limited. It's only cancer, rare diseases, Alzheimer and dementias, mental health, and under a specific legislation, infectious diseases and occupational diseases. We don't have at the European level a policy for diabetes, for cardiovascular diseases, for other diseases which could be perfectly considered as very important. Of course, the privileged field of action in terms of diseases for the European Union has been always cancer. And the policy on cancer started in '97, and in this last year, 2021, the Europe Beating Cancer Plan, one of the most important efforts in terms of health policy in the European Union, has been adopted. It's the same thing for rare diseases. The legislation is from 2008 and 2009, and now we are in a period of updating in this policy, especially thanks to the French presidency of the European Union. Okay, that's a little the situation. And we had, for more or less responding to all these diseases, a limited health program, 360 million for 7 years. But what happens? That in 2021, the Union discovered that probably that was not enough and that it's necessary to put a much more important budget, 5.1 billion, which multiplies enormously the budget dedicated to the health in the European Union. And this is something that has an impact for patients, certainly, for pharma companies, certainly, for researchers, for everyone which is a stakeholder in the field of health. Now there is a complete different period. And this is what we need to know, we need to analyze, and we need to see together how we can respond to these new times with new instruments. That's one of the things. We have now a scenario in which, as I said, we have a Europe for Health plan. We have if I can say like this, thanks to the COVID, a new, completely different approach in terms of words that were not very popular, if you want, at the level of the European Commission: early detection, screening. Now, these are magic words, used everywhere. And now everyone is discovering that really it's important to improve our capacities in the screening of cancer, in the screening, newborn screening particularly of the rare diseases, in the screening of autism, in the screening of a lot of diseases. Now, if you are really persons thinking, what can I do in terms of my maybe commercial perspective or patient's perspective, etc., think about early detection, think about newborn screening, think about the screening in general, because now this is the time for really taking into account this type of possibilities. And of course, it's also the time of the cooperation. The cooperation in terms of expanding the knowledge and facilitating that the knowledge travels. And that's the reason for which the European Union launched a very important initiative, which is the creation of the European reference networks. The European reference networks, particularly in the case of rare diseases, but not only, constitutes an opportunity unique because there are more than 900 healthcare stakeholders participating in these European reference networks. And this is a call that is repeatedly launched by the European Commission in order to expand the existing 24 European reference networks, because I insist, it is important that a hospital in Cádiz in Spain is cooperating with a hospital in Riga in Latvia, but it's not thinking in the fact that the patient should travel. What should travel is the knowledge. And that's the most important thing. We need to expand the knowledge and the share of the knowledge. And of course, there are other possibilities that are being opened. In the previous session, it was explained, and I think it's very important, the European health data space. After times of doubts, hesitations about how should be treated the data on health in the context of the general regulation of the European Union, well, the health data will have a particular approach, a particular treatment, and it's important that now also for researchers, for people really investing in health, it's important to know that this share of knowledge that will represent the European health data space is really an instrument with a powerful and extraordinary impact and capacity. And of course, we have much more things that are going later. Diagnosis. We mentioned before that it's very important, start from the beginning, from the screening, from the early detection, and go to the possibilities of seeing what we can do in terms of diagnosis. It's true that you should consider that the European Union has not all the possibilities in terms of legislation for health. I can say more or less, if I can put an example, that what happens inside the hospitals is the competence of the member states. What happens outside the hospitals could be the competence of the European Union if the member states agrees in giving this competence. And this is the situation. And of course, we need to insist in how to develop these clinical development plans. We need, for instance, in the case of rare diseases, the creation of the European Platform of Rare Diseases Registration. It's a platform located in Ispra, in Italy, in the GRC, the Joint Research Center, which is now collecting the data of the 600, approximately, rare diseases registers which exist in the European Union, and trying to establish a dialogue between these registers. And this is important. It's not only the pretension of creating a European register of rare diseases. Is a coordination of the existing registers in order that these registers dialogues facilitates the access to the people in the research, in the clinical treatment, etc., and producing an environment and possibilities for creating what is absolutely necessary to create, clinical trials. It's in the case of rare diseases, if every company should look for a necessary sample of patients for a rare disease, this is an exercise that everybody knows that is terrible for a little company in particular. Now, if you have the possibility to have this data about patients in a single registration at European level, your task will be facilitated. Your possibilities of having the necessary people for doing the clinical trial will be expanded and facilitated. And what is important is after how this data will be available. This is the task of the European health data space. There is a lot of discussions, and my colleagues in the digital equipment at the level of the European Commission have a very complicated task, but I am absolutely convinced that we will have at European level a real capacity for being a big producer of data and at the same time a big user of data, because it's not only to collect data. somebody should use the data. And probably companies knows very well the necessity of having good data for producing good technologies. And I think that finally, we have a starting point which is very important. In the case, for instance, of rare diseases, I can mention in this slide, you can see that when for the first time the European Union started to talk about rare diseases, it was in 2008, 2009. And at the time, we had 4 member states having a national plan of rare diseases. Now, we have, including UK, 26 from the 28. Only 2 member states in the European Union, Sweden and Malta, don't have a national plan for rare diseases. And this is a very important success, because this type of national plans, as it exists also in the case of cancer and for other diseases, are normally integrated approach, putting together the possibilities in the field of research, in the field of epidemiology, in the field of diagnosis and clinical treatment, is very powerful instruments. And we are in France, which is the example of an extraordinary national plan on rare diseases. And it was based on the example of France that nowadays 26 of the 28, always including the UK, which is an exercise that maybe I should not do, but for purely statistical terms, I do it. And this is something that is an example. As the newborn screening should be an example. Why EuroDis, which is the most important federation of patients in the field of rare diseases, insist in the newborn screening? Because what you can do at the moment of the birth will save money if you won't only think on this. If our authorities think how we can reduce the impact of the rare diseases in national budgets, do the newborn screening at the first moment of the birth, in the 2 or 3 days after the birth. And you will save a lot of money, believe me, because to treat a rare disease after is much more expensive. That's the reason for which screening is so important, and the screening needs certainly to be one of the most important fields in the coming years. And okay, it was my introduction. I don't know if it's useful. I hope that at least gives to you a certain overview that in Europe things are happening, things very interesting are happening, and that the cooperation between patients, professionals, researchers, enterprises, pharma companies is much more necessary than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for this very comprehensive overview on what has been done, what is ongoing at the European level. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity later on to discuss what we still have to do. So now we will move to concrete examples. And the first one will be the presentation by Ayala Blia of MoveCare. And you will see it's, for me, extraordinary what can be done just with a very simple application. Thank you, Ayala.
Thank you, Alain, and I'm happy to be here. And, it's very interesting to hear all these voices, and I'm happy to share our experience with a concrete application. So MoveCare is the first digital therapy that is first reimbursed in France. It's a digital therapy that is based on patient-reported outcome, and that allows the doctor to monitor the patient remotely, to the patient who have patients who have cancer. It's a very easy application to use, and I will show you later. But what is very important to know, it's not just an application. I think this is the most important, is a medical device, class 1 medical device, soon class 2A medical device, meaning that we have done a lot of clinical studies. I think this is really the first point about digital therapy. We have done many years, 7 years of clinical studies in order to prove the benefit of MoveCare for the patients. The innovation here was to do clinical studies, the same as for a drug. So we had 2 arms, one control arm, one experimental arm, and then we followed the patient with MoveCare, and we were able to demonstrate that patients who were followed with Move Care had 7.6 months improvement in overall survival. For patients with lung cancer, it's a lot. It's 26% of improvement, and they also had improvement in quality of life. So we had publication in the JAMA, in the GNCI. We went twice to ASCO to present our results, and therefore we were able to secure the reimbursement in 2020. Today, MoveCare is being used in 70 centers in France, prescribed by 135 physicians, and we hope to have a lot more patients using it going forward. So how does it work? It's very simple. The first step is the prescription by the doctor. The doctor needs to prescribe MoveCare, the same as for a drug. It's a paper prescription. Once the patient receives the prescription, we start sending, as you can see here, a weekly questionnaire to the patient. It's questions that are based on symptoms. So, for example, do you feel weak, breathlessness, cough, all these symptoms. And the power of MoveCare is the algorithm that analyzes the combination of these symptoms, not only on the time t, but really on a dynamic point of view. And if the algorithm detects an anomaly, a complication, anything, therefore the system will send an alert to the doctor. We proved that the tool has a very high specificity, a very high sensitivity, meaning that if there is a problem, there is an alert. If there is no problem, there is no alert. Because if you disturb the doctor every 2 minutes, it's not going to work. So it's very important that the tool really send an alert only if it's needed. The question that it's often asked, and maybe now we understand a bit more, but before patient-reported outcome, such a tool was really totally new. It's how such a tool can improve survival. And by 7.6 months, which is significant, the reality is that a patient who has cancer is only going to see his oncologist every 3 months or every 6 months, depending if you are under treatment or under surveillance. And everything that happens between the visit, between the scanner, often gets undetected. The patient just thinks, maybe it's not related to the cancer, I don't want to bother the doctor. So he's just going to wait until the next visit to talk about his symptom to the doctor. And when he does, unfortunately, it's very often too late to give him an optimal treatment. So by following closely the evolution of the symptom of the patient, we are able to detect on time the relapse or the complication, and therefore to treat earlier the patient and to give him the right treatment at the right time. For the patient, the benefit is really obvious, overall survival improvement, but above the overall survival is also a question of quality of life. You have patient who is very often sick and alone with his sickness, and it's unless you are a VIP patient and you have a direct line with the doctor, yes, usually you just have to wait until the visit to talk to the doctor. And this tool really gives the patient the impression to be closer from the doctor, to have a personalized follow-up. Somebody is looking out for me, somebody is really following me. And I think that what's important also from what I heard before is the fact that we created the tool together with the patients. And therefore, the tool is very easy to use, and the patient, for them, in fact, you will see testimonials. They tell us, I'm waiting for the Monday to fill out my questionnaire because this day I feel that I'm really closer from the doctor. So I just want to say that very often, unfortunately, we wait until it's too late to do something. We wait until the patient's health state is so deteriorated that it's too late to act. And the goal for me of MoveCare and digital therapy is really not to wait and to go to the patient in order to be really proactive and to have the good reaction on the right time. Also, like we discussed a lot about the lack of equality of the access of treatment for all patients. Patients live very far away from the hospital sometimes, Also during the COVID, we realized that the patients who have cancer, they are fragile, they are scared to go to the hospital, they are going to catch maybe some infection. And such a tool really is a way to give equality to access to everyone. So the patient is at the heart of our product. You have here numbers, you can see very numbers that speak for themselves. You have 98% of the patients who really find the application intuitive, easy. 8 patients on 10 that really feel that the application reassures them regarding their medical care. I think that I heard before that the compliance of the patient is low, but here with MoveCare we have a proof that if it's the right application, it can be actually very high. We have 95% of compliance in real life from the patient to MoveCare. Here you can just see, and I will finish with that, some patients who really say that it reassures them, it's very reassuring, I'm waiting for the Monday. So we are really working for this testimonial of the patient. We know that this tool is great for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayala. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. It seems that, in fact, we are here close to the field of, with targeted therapy, we speak about companion diagnostic. And really, this approach is a companion of the treatment. And it's really a way of optimizing the treatment, and considering that you choose as an example non-small cell lung cancer. 10 years ago, there was no alternative treatment to patients relapsing after frontline therapy. Today, it's not anymore the case. We have targeted therapies, we have immune checkpoint inhibitors, we have a lot. And it's important to allow the patient to access this effective treatment as soon as possible, as you say, because you cannot wait weeks or even months before your relapse will be detected. If it's early detection, it will be much more efficient. So we will move to another also very interesting example in a different field, different approach, but it's also very important to hear about your care at home platform.
All right, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with all these like-minded people. So I'm going to be talking about Biteflies and specifically our care at home platform. And so to just start off with maybe a little bit of context, and I think it's going to echo quite a few things that were maybe already said in the first panel earlier today, is that currently there's some major challenges in healthcare. A big one being that more than 50% of people worldwide nowadays have at least one chronic condition. So and on top of that, these chronic conditions are associated with a loss of disability-adjusted life years, with the years lived without disability are actually stagnating, especially for rare diseases, but other complex chronic conditions too. The time to diagnose can be very long, and the costs for all of this are exploding worldwide. So if you look at the healthcare landscape, and again, if we're talking about those challenges, then you see that in a lot of cases, the new drug discoveries, new targets are identified on a frequent basis still, and a lot of new innovative medicines are coming on the market. However, when we're talking about the delivery of that care, that's where there is that's where we can really still make major improvements. If you look at, for instance, point-of-care technology, and then we're talking about the more traditional version of point-of-care technologies that are hospital or clinic-based, they are typically spot checks. Usually they're fairly accurate, but they are expensive. They require specialized personnel to operate them. They have a lot of operational overhead. On the other hand, you have on the right side of the slide things like self-reporting. And like we just heard from MoveCare, if applied well, it can be very, very powerful. But the general consensus right now is still that self-reporting is fairly subjective in nature, whether it's through self-reported outcomes or through medical history. And the adherence can be low when the tools are not fit for purpose. So what we're looking at is, what we see at Biteflies is a major opportunity to fill that problem or to fix that problem of delivery of care. But it requires a paradigm shift. If you go back a couple of decades, then a lot of the healthcare facilities were becoming better and better at providing care, but they were very fragmented. They were isolated from each other. Then more recently, there has been kind of a phase where there's been more and more centralization in the sense that centers of excellence were created, networks of providers were created to care for specific, more complex diseases. Nowadays, and we're really talking about like a very frequent change, very much boosted by COVID care, we're more and more talking about virtual care, where the idea is that the care goes where the patient is. Now, of course, that's not always possible. For some specialized interventions, you will still need to go to a specialized facility, but more and more we're trying to organize the care and the care paths around where the patient is, bring the care to them to make it more effective. And so that's where our Care at Home platform comes in. So what is it? It's a end-to-end remote patient monitoring service. And it consists of a couple of steps. They're outlined on the slide on the bottom. So a provider will prescribe care at home, and there's more than one care at home. I'll come back to that on the next slide. We take care of the logistics to make sure that if wearable devices are needed, and we develop these wearable devices with medical certification ourselves. So we make sure that those medical devices get shipped to the right location, to the patient directly or through their provider. Patient starts monitoring with the solution, data comes in, we crunch the numbers and upload reports to the provider. Typically, those reports are uploaded on a daily basis, so that also means that the monitoring, the length of monitoring can be dynamically adjusted. So it's not because the provider says, hey, we should be monitoring this person for 2 weeks, but maybe after 3 days they already pick up what they've been looking for. They can actually stop based on the results generated that so far. So why do we call it a platform? Because it really consists of a number of systems that work together. So we have what we call plug and patch. So these devices that we build, they're more advanced, or they at least record more advanced signals than what you can typically record on your wrist. So they need adhesives with flexible electronics incorporated in them to connect them to your body. So we have collaborations with various world leaders and industry partners on medical adhesives, flexible electronics, to very quickly put out new designs based on the patient populations that we want to cover. Next to that, we have SensorDot. That's really at the core of the platform. That's kind of our main wearable device, and all of the things that you need to make sure that the data gets uploaded to our cloud so that we can crunch the numbers. And then we get to Care at Home. And as you can see here, and I mentioned it previously on the slide before, there's not a single Care at Home. We have multiple versions that are optimized for specific groups of people. The way we do that is we have a couple of components that we will typically optimize for a specific disease indication. So for instance, the dashboard that the healthcare professional uses, the analytics that we run will be optimized. The patient app can be tailor-made towards their specific needs. And then we have the logistics and the reports that we generate that kind of tie all of this together. So to give you a couple of examples of 3 of these Care at Home applications that are currently actually active in the field, primarily in Belgium where we're headquartered. One of them is COVID Care at Home. So as the name implies, this is for people that have stable or non-severe COVID. They either end up in the emergency department because they have symptoms, but they're not severe enough to be admitted. They were hospitalized, but their symptoms have improved. They're in an assisted care facility. They were forwarded by a GP and so forth. In any case, they flow to COVID Care at Home, where they get sent home for up to 7 days with this system. And the important part is that the Care at Home application kind of integrates all these different care providers that are interacting with the patients, the hospital, the specialist, the GP, and a telemonitoring team. And so outcomes that are possible from COVID Care at Home are either full discharge when vital signs are still stable after 7 days, or when they deteriorate, a readmission. So this system has been used to monitor more than 1,200 patients in Belgium. 30 hospitals have been using it for more than a year now. It has resulted in reduced length of stay, up to 2 days per patient, and very similar to what we heard before about move care, especially from elderly people. We consistently hear that the knowledge that somebody's watching over them in this kind of scary period is really something that improves their quality of life. And so this application is currently reimbursed based on temporary emergency COVID-19 related codes in Belgium. Another application that we have is CardioCare at home. So here we're going to be screening for atrial fibrillation specifically after people had a cryptogenic stroke, meaning a stroke where the underlying cause is unknown, or had a clinical TIA. So they go home, they're still in the hospital depending on their situation, for up to 4 weeks with a solution that will continuously screen for the presence of atrial fibrillation. Again, similar concept. Specialists and first-line providers are all kind of connected through this platform directly to the patient. After the monitoring period, depending on the data that's been collected, either AFib will be diagnosed and a treatment plan can be started, or they will move to ultra long-term monitoring, for instance, with an implantable loop recorder if that's indicated. So one of the things that we've seen is that, particularly in Belgium, there can be very long wait times after somebody suffered a stroke to get to appropriate monitoring if they're waiting for a more traditional Holter type setup or an implantable loop recorder. So with CardioCare at home, we're trying to reduce those wait times and actually have no wait times at all anymore, which not only ensures that we could potentially detect AFib sooner and potentially prevent a secondary stroke, but also that the anxiety during this period is reduced in the patients. Next to that, of course, from a more, let's say, high-level point of view, this whole platform acts as a data integrator. We've heard a lot about that from previous speakers. It also integrates the caregivers that are working with the patient, and of course all of our data is based on medical devices, so we're really following an evidence-based approach, and these are kind of the components that you need to get to the to start putting value-based principle into practice. A final application that we have is EpiCare at home. So this is focused on people with epilepsy who have a need for seizure counting. So it can be because their seizures are uncontrolled, they self-reported seizures, they underwent a treatment change, and there's a need to keep a closer eye on them. Then they can go home, again, 1 week up to 4 weeks on average. Here we're really looking at pretty advanced signals, including EEG that is being recorded in the home with a wearable device. Similar principle, outcomes in this case of the care path can be various things. It can lead to a change in treatment, it can lead to a decision to go through ultra long-term monitoring, and so forth. So also here, because especially the use of this system compared to going to a hospital and being hooked up to a full EEG setup with a video camera on your face in terms of quality of life is very different. And of course, that's, let's say, an added benefit on top of all the diagnostic data that you're collecting in the real world. And all of the things that I was mentioning with CardioCare at home that apply from a, let's say, value-based care perspective, of course, apply in this case as well. So my coordinates are on this slide. If anybody in the audience wants to reach out and has any questions, feel free to reach out directly, but you can also put them in the system so that we can discuss them during the panel.
Thank you, Ben. We saw through your presentation that digitalization can be really part of precision medicine and even personalized medicine. It's really tailored for specific, not only specific diseases, but also specific type of patients.
Exactly, yes.
So it's really personalized medicine. So now we will have the testimony of a patient, Euros, and Euros will tell us how patients with chronic diseases can live and live better in this new environment of digital health. Please, Euros.
Thank you, Alan. It's really a pleasure to be here among you. This is HealthTech for Patients, nonetheless. So I'm glad to be a representative of the patients here on this panel and this event. So yeah, living with type 1 diabetes for more than 12 years, I've had a lot of experience with health tech, and in these modern times, I think diabetes is one of the chronic conditions that has so many things going on in terms of health tech, mostly with insulin delivery. So insulin, the drug you need to survive, using insulin pumps, smart pens. So there are many different devices. Also glucose monitoring, the continuous glucose monitoring using different types of sensors, as well as applications that combine all that data, that share that data with your healthcare provider. So there is a lot of things going on. So I think I have the opportunity to share what we do like and what we don't. So in the following few minutes, I'll try to do just that. So essentially, I think the majority of patients living with diabetes actually love these new technologies because it improves their quality of life. It relieves the burden from the patient of living with that chronic condition 24/7. We have no vacations from our conditions, so it's a real benefit to have something taken away from you, just one thing to worry about during the day less. However, there are some big issues with in this area. I'm not going to focus too much on access to these technologies because I believe we'll be talking about it during the discussion. So provided that we do have access to this technology, what are the issues? I think the most important thing and the biggest issue is the lack of education and communication between the stakeholders. I've put out 3 stakeholders here. Obviously, the list is longer, but I think these 3 stakeholders are key in this area, which I find problematic. So what happens? A new product comes on the market, provided we have access to it. Healthcare providers, I think, healthcare professionals, I think they are the first ones to get familiarized with it. They communicate with the pharmaceutical companies on an expert level. They have conferences, they have meetings, so they are aware of the new technologies. And the tech provider needs to share the knowledge, share the information on that new device, so what it can and cannot do. But then it is important that the healthcare professionals and the tech provider both refer that information to the patient, because in the end it is up to the patient with its healthcare professional to decide which treatment, which device, what is optimal for that particular patient. And that is what Ben, you mentioned, the personalized care, the tailored care. I think that is definitely the future. But what happens, it's not accidental that I've put these 3 stakeholders in this particular pattern, because it shouldn't be like this. I think the knowledge of the patients is very often underestimated, because in the end we are the ones living with the condition. Without offense to healthcare professionals, you studied it, but we live it. So I think it's very important to treat patients as equal partners, so to remove this barrier between the ladder approach. Patients need to be treated equally, and Anthony mentioned in the beginning, the sharing of knowledge. I think there is a lot of things that both the tech providers, the healthcare professionals, and all other stakeholders can learn from the patients themselves. And I would just like to share, some information, like an example of what happens if that communication is not on a very good level. So I've taken these 2 sentences from the manuals of 2 devices that are very commonly used, with people with diabetes. They are glucose monitors. used by, I believe, millions of people living with diabetes around the world. So it's essentially, it says that there are some substances, some not so uncommon ones, so mostly paracetamol and vitamin C, for instance, that can have that can have an effect to falsely raise the readings of the glucose monitor and to show actually higher glucose levels than they actually are. These devices have been on the market for years now, and I've only noticed it quite recently. One of the diabetes bloggers that I follow on social media posted a story and said, "Did you guys know that this device is affected by the levels of vitamin C in your body?" And I think no one knew. You know, putting my legal hat on because I'm an attorney, I'm not saying that anyone withheld any information. I mean, these sentences are still from the manual. But I think, you know, there was a misunderstanding, you know, of the target of the patient because I guess the tech providers did not think, you know, this information was too important. So they put it on page 27 of the manual without actually telling the patients something that, you know, they might find very important. And I think this information was very important 2 years ago because, as I said, these devices are on the market for years. And then in 2020, COVID struck. I think the number of people that started or increased, you know, taking vitamin C supplements or, you know, taking paracetamol as, you know, a drug to treat active COVID patients, the numbers were huge. And then you had the situation where a device that you essentially trust your life with, and you have done so for years before, actually fails you. I mean, it does not fail, but it can give you false information which can lead to some certain consequences, you know, in relation to diabetes. And if you're sick, you want your, you know, blood glucose to be in range as much as possible, and you want accurate data. So, and when I actually Googled, you know, this information, this statement, a lot of clinical studies arose, you know, there were a lot of results on clinical studies actually studying this particular influence of these substances. Which means, you know, going back to the previous slide, the tech providers and the healthcare professionals are aware of this because, you know, the scientists and the companies work together to discover why this is and to obviously overcome these issues. But the patients had no idea. I mean, I've talked to, I think, more than 20 people with diabetes around me who use these devices. No one knew that, you know, there are some substances that can affect. So I think, you know, that is something that we need to be looking forward to improve. As I said, you know, hearing the patient's voice, because in the beginning, you know, the tech providers and the healthcare professionals know more about the disease, the new product, the new technology, but give a patient a few years living with the condition, using the specific technology, I think they surpass the other stakeholders with their knowledge because they have personal experiences. So if we used that patient knowledge from the beginning, from the inception phase of a certain new product, of certain new technologies, you know, just asking a patient what they actually need to help take that burden of the condition off the patient itself, I think, you know, we will do a lot. So, you know, in the end, having patients as equal partners in that in the healthcare systems, patients as individuals, but most importantly, patient associations as organizations that, you know, can crunch all that information, you know, from various people, various patients living with that certain condition, and refer all that information to the other stakeholders. If we, can improve on that, I think, we can definitely improve the lives of patients, which I believe is our common goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Euros. Thank you for this very detailed discussion already. Not discussion, but presentation of really what patients are expecting. So now we will move to the general discussion, and waiting the question from the audience, I would like to start with you. And if I was summarizing all your presentation with one word, I will take a word used by Euros, which is access. Access is key, definitively. And I would like you to elaborate, based on your experience, your involvement in the different components, what for you has to be done, has to be improved in terms of access. And access is not just, when we speak about access, we think about market access. No, it's not just market access. It's access to all the components, including information, proper information, right, accurate information, but there are a lot of different components through the idea of access. So, Anthony, please, can you start? We always start with the legislative and regulatory component when we are speaking about health, treatment, and so on.
No, I agree with you that access is a magical word because we need access to care, access to cure, access to medication, access to treatment. First of all, and Euros has very well explained it, access to information. That's essential. And at this moment, well, I think things are improving, probably because there is a special agent very active at the level of the European Union, which are the patient associations. That's very important. I explained it at the beginning. We have a very important policy at the European level in the field of rare diseases. Okay, thanks to EURORDIS. We have a very important policy in the field of care. Okay, thanks to the European Coalition of Patients of Cancer, which is a very powerful association. We have a very good policy, more or less, in the field of Alzheimer and dementia, thanks to Alzheimer Europe. Then, I mean, when there is a real pressure, professional pressure, very well organized lobbying from the side of the patient associations, the access is always easiest. And of course, the role of the International Diabetes Federation is also very, very important in this field. Autism Europe, okay, there are a lot of different associations. Without this associative world from the patients, the access will be much more complicated. And I think that is the two things that we will put together. We need better access, and we need better, I will not say better patients, but we need better organized patients that are able to do the necessary lobbying, the necessary pressure in order to have a very good access to cure, to care, to treatment, to medication, and to information.
Euros, can you not answer to Anthony, but maybe develop what he just said about patient involvement?
Of course, to develop further, I think again, in terms of access, there is a lot, to the patients as well. A lot of things that patients through patient organizations can do. Again, usually, again speaking from the perspective of diabetes, there's a whole lot of us. People living with diabetes. The prevalence is around 10% in most European countries, or even higher. So 10% of people of Europe have diabetes. Most of them actually don't know they have diabetes, which is an issue, but, let's not go into there. But they possess, this moving force, and if patient organizations can handle that force and can instruct it in a very precise way, I think it can be the overpowering energy to actually get that access. Access to care is essential and access obviously to new health technologies will actually improve our lives. So we are all rooting for that and working on that. But it is difficult, and that is why we need to through these panels, through different participation at conferences, etc., and through communications with other stakeholders. Obviously, no one is just going to invite us and give us our space. We need to push for it. But if we can fight it out with all other stakeholders, if we can actually make ourselves equal with them, I think there is a lot we can do in terms of access.
Okay. Ayala and Ben, both of you mentioned during your presentation, Ayala, the reimbursement of MoveCare in France, but in France only. Ben, you mentioned the reimbursement of your platform dedicated to COVID in Belgium. So why we do not have in this field larger access, more harmonization between the different European countries? Can you answer?
Well, first, I think that there is a lack that we have the MDR, for example, so there is harmonization in the regulation, which is great, but there is no harmonization in the way how to access the market. So in Germany, for example, you have the DIGA. In France, you have now the telesurveillance law. Each country is working very independently, and I do believe that they should work together. They should put in place something like much more harmonious, so that like the industrial doesn't have like to go for reimbursement in France and then go to Germany and then go to Belgium. I think that it's just something that needs to be done by the authorities. When you talk about access, there is something that is very important, is the clinical studies. This is the only reason we got the reimbursement. We have proof. It's a medical device, it's for the good of the patient. We don't want to give just an application, and we don't know if there is like a benefit for the patient and if there is a benefit for the organization. But clinical studies takes a long time and it costs a lot of money. So it's good to request such proof to get the CE mark and to get reimbursed. But I do believe that also here, the authorities, they need to accompany the industrial in order to be able like, to get the proof. Otherwise, it will be very difficult, I think, like to scale.
Ben?
Yeah, I can definitely try to add on to what you were just saying. So you mentioned the DIGA, the German legislation, the French legislation. I can maybe comment quickly on what's happening in Belgium. So in Belgium, we have the concept of what's called mHealth Belgium, and more specifically, they have the mHealth pyramid. And so the mHealth pyramid consists of 3 layers, and it really, it's a broad base, and then it goes up. And the lowest level is CE certification. So there is a requirement that anything that labels itself as a mobile health technology, remote patient monitoring solution, whatever, needs to be CE certified medical device. The second layer is an interesting one. There's no clear guidance around it yet, but it has to do with being interoperable with the e-health landscape in Belgium in this case. The fact that it's focused on Belgium is another problem that we're discussing here because it's very localized, but nevertheless they are trying on the country level to make sure that there is a requirement that you need to be interoperable. Now the third level is reimbursement. And as you were just saying, that requires that your evidence requirements are met. And so the interesting thing that they're doing now, this is this is a very recent change, a couple of weeks ago, is that they're splitting the M3 level, it's called, the highest level, the reimbursement level, into two sub-steps. The lowest level of M3, of the third level, is temporary reimbursement. In other words, if you can make a good case based on literature, based on some level of information that's already available in the field, that this might be useful, you might be able to get temporary reimbursement to already start collecting data in the field within a certain time period before you get, hopefully, permanent reimbursement. So that's then the second level, is the permanent reimbursement. And they're really trying to map this on different care paths as opposed to the technology. So technology is no longer the driver, the care path that you're trying to cover and the potential value you can create is the driver. So if a competitor comes in with a similar solution, they may not need to go through all the clinical trials and all collecting all the medical evidence if it is similar enough. Now, those guidelines are still very much under development. So what that means, similar enough, is not necessarily clear. But this is just Belgium. And this is a different system from what we're seeing in Germany, from what we're seeing in France. There's some overlap, but definitely a lot of differences too. Coming back to the point that there's a lot of fragmentation in Europe, which is, if we can figure out a way to move away from that, we can definitely be much more competitive in Europe compared to the rest of the world than we are now.
We have a question from the audience, which is in fact a sort of prolongation of what you just said. So the question is, can the developed wearables in Belgium be scaled up in other lands, context, or do they have to be customized for each patient context? Do you have cost effectiveness data?
So that's a very good question. And so we think, and we really firmly believe, that it is incredibly important to make sure that you develop towards an application that is really tailor-made to that specific group of patients. Because otherwise, as you said, with MoveCare, you'll have low adherence, you'll have low compliance, it will simply not work, and it will not generate the data that allows a physician to use it for his or her decision-making. In other words, it's that solution, it will not be used, right? So we strongly believe in that customization, but you have to draw a line because you can't certify every single bit and component. That's why the platform approach is so important, because we certify these individual components individually, but then we can reuse them for other types of applications depending on how we put, let's say, the box of Legos back together to cover another application.
And I have also a question for Ayala. The question is, does MoveCare increases the workload of doctor?
It's a very good question.
It's an easy question to answer.
Also, it's a question that goes back also to the access, because once you get the reimbursement, you also need to be used by the doctor. And it's true that doctors are very often scared that it will increase their workload. The answer is not simple. It's not exactly that it will increase the workload, it is that it will impact completely the organization. So we realized over time that, for example, a nurse is very important in the process. If you have an hospital with a nurse, a coordinating nurse, for example, that can do a pre-triage of the alerts, it will be perfect for the doctor. If not, so it can be a bit more difficult, and it will increase the workload of the doctor, at least initially. What we did at Sivan, yes, we have a nurse that belongs to Sivan, in order to help the doctor, in order to do this work of pre-triage of the alerts. But we do hope that with the new law that was issued in France, it will be financed by the French authorities. So.
And there was, from the same person, a second question, but I think you answered. Can the doctor still provide care to the same number of patients? Same course. Number, or less, or more?
No, for the same number, because the way it will do, it will reallocate the work of the doctor also. So at the end of the day, he will be able to provide the same care to all his patients. Also, something I want to say to the doctors, because it's very important, is that it actually saves them time during the medical visit. This is super important, because they have the complete view of all the evolution of the symptoms of the patient. So the doctor, they need like to spend less time on the technical aspect of the visit and more time on the human aspect of the visit. So this is essential, I think.
Yeah, and I think we can even say this can allow the doctor to follow and to have a better follow-up of more patients. Because even if we may consider that you can spend more time at the beginning explaining and so on, thereafter you will save time, and you will save time. Today, we spoke about non-small cell lung cancer, but MoveCare can also be used in, let's say, really chronic diseases. Mm-hmm. And it will be follow-up for months, years. So
I agree. Once the doctor will be educated, he will know how it works, eventually it can save him time on the longer run.
Yeah, we see very similar things, that if you engage the healthcare professionals as early as possible in the process and try to get them on board, that it has a dramatic positive effect on the way the application is used. And the same for the patients, by the way, as to your point.
Exactly, and that is the thing. If you have different inputs, different perspectives, and we all do have different perspectives, I think it can only make the product better.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. What is the best way to receive the patient's perspective for pharmaceutical companies? So it's also primarily for you, but it's also a question for Ayala and Ben.
Well, knowing that there are certain restrictions in, pharmaceutical companies communicating directly to patients. Obviously, the legislation is quite strict there. But I think you should, the patient organizations, as they're not individual patients. They represent the patients. And I don't know, for instance, in Serbia, the Diabetes Association of Serbia has good relationships with pharmaceutical companies in the country. We try to have a good relationship with the government, with the universal healthcare provider. So, in that way, if you have a good relationship, you can be recognized as a partner, and you can actually advocate for the stance of the patient and present their perspective to the table. And what we always like to say, that spending money in treating patients and improving their quality of life is not actually spending money; it's investing. Rather than spending or losing money in, them having a worse quality of life or even dying, or, it's not spending money, it's investing.
So before closing this roundtable, because we do not have much time, I would like you just to deliver very briefly one message. Who would like to start? Considering that we will end with euros, because this roundtable was dedicated to patient, so the patient has to have the last word. So who would like to start? Ayala?
Okay, I think that what's important is to say that digital therapy, the technology, it's the future of the medicine. It will not replace the drug. It does not replace the doctor, of course, but it will become more and more essential. I believe that the patients today are more and more willing to participate to their follow-up. They want to be active. I don't believe they want to be passive. I really believe that they want to be active, to be an active part, a stakeholder in their follow-up. And I think that the digital therapy, they really help them do that and be more engaged in their follow-up.
Ben, a brief conclusion from you?
Sure. So, and kind of maybe to extend on that, because fully agreed with what you just said, and I would add, it takes a village, right? It won't be like if you look at what we're doing at Biteflies. This platform is just a tiny piece of the puzzle to make care more engaging, to make it more accurate, to make it more personalized, to make it more precise, and it will require a very large group of stakeholders to all rally around the same cause. And the fact that the European Union is looking into this, the fact that in the US various efforts are underway to look into that is encouraging, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Anthony, what's your message?
No, I think looking at the performances today in this roundtable, which are extraordinary, really, well, it's positive, constructive, and optimistic, because really it's important that people like you are doing the extraordinary efforts that you are doing and creating things really useful for the patients. I think that it's also very positive that at the level of the European Union, things are changing the mind in the sense of the importance of concepts as early detection, screening, ignored in the past. It's also important that in the new revision of the pharma legislation, one of the main points is to align the decisions of the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, with the decisions of the FDA, the Food and Drugs Associations in the United States, to avoid the stupid situations when an approval here and not approval there. And I think that really, well, finally we can say maybe we should thank the COVID-20 because the COVID has changed things, and sometimes, well, we can say it's changing in a positive way, and we should extract lessons that are positive for everybody.
Euros, the last word?
Health tech indeed does change the lives of patients, usually for the better. I think we've heard, from the perspective of Move Care that simpler is usually better, and that is the case. If you have health tech which takes off the burden of the condition, but you get another burden of actually using, and we avoid, as patients, we avoid using the word being compliant, but actually using that technology and making yourself do it every day. I think if you get to that part, it becomes more difficult, so you're not going to get the same results. So you want to say? So I think we need to work together on better, simpler solutions which are accessible to the most people as possible, and I think by that we will actually help the patients, which I hope is our common goal.
Thank you, Euros. Thank you all, and thank you for the people who followed us until the end of this roundtable. Alison, I'm sorry.
Perfect timing, absolutely perfect. Thank you so much to Anthony, Alaya, Ben, Euros, and thank you, Alan, for your moderation of this truly inspiring. It's really our warm thanks to you all. In a few minutes, we will be bringing our afternoon event to a close. Before that, we will be sending out the second survey, and we would ask you to take a couple of moments to fill it in, because we really are looking forward to getting your feedback following this inspiring and rich discussion. So, stay with us. In a few moments, we will be concluding. See you then. This has been a truly inspiring afternoon. Strong speakers, engaging experts, and above all, passionate people. To conclude, I now have the pleasure of handing over to Christian Polica. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First, congratulations for the questions, because we had more than 50% of increase in front of last year. So it seems that the message has been received, because it is important you to participate, all of you, to this event. You know, the questions are very important. Not all of them have been answered, but I think a large part of them. So to conclude, it's difficult. It's always difficult to be better than the speakers, because they are better than me. So it's only to try to synthesize and to transfer perhaps some personal messages, because I support this. I will say the basic idea for this event. So patients since many years, since I was with Sanofi more than 25 years ago. And so I shall try to transfer to you what I believe, and I am very happy to see that what has been said is really corresponding to what I believe strongly since many years. So first, the growing and essential role of patients, so it's very important. It has been neglected, in the past. It was also difficult. It was not only, I would say, the fault of the different actors, the pharma industry. It was also difficult to discuss with patients. Patient association, it has changed a lot. I am very happy with that. The transfer of technologies and tools to the patients has benefits, but it is also issues for them, but it has to be discussed and resolved. Patients must be active participants to their health. So it's necessary to organize care around the patients. So this is very important. We need a better coordination and collaboration of healthcare system for prediction, from prediction to treatments. We need to focus on customer technologies, to have technologies which are, if I can say, easy to use, not very innovative always, but easy to use for the patients. So common technologies, if I can say that. And clinicians has to develop more. It is not always the case, partnership with the patient. So it is perhaps the more important ideas I have obtained from this event. The second teaching is that it's necessary to exchange, to share, to utilize data, to optimize treatments. Mohammed explained that in oncology today, only 20% of recommendations are based on DNA teaching. In the early future, I know that, and it has been the consequence of many sciences and technologies contributing to it. It will become close to 100%, the recommendation coming. And because the new tools, as RNA, as artificial intelligence, a third teaching is necessary to innovate permanently at the human level to improve quality of life when curing diseases. It is very important to capture from human medical daily insights, information, necessity to optimize impact on day-to-day life. We spoke about it, and it's very important. We have not to forget that we have to cure people, but they have also to protect their life, and quality of their life. The fourth teaching for me is the improvement of treatments can be developed for practical reasons. For the more developed countries, it's something which is very important for me, but also we need to don't forget the less developed countries. So it's very important to be extended as fast as possible to the whole world. I am collaborating with the people from the Gates Foundation. You know that it is their first objective to develop for the developed countries, because it is perhaps more easy to implement it. But after that, immediately to think about how it's possible to transfer it to the countries under development or less developed. I don't like the word, but it's a fight. But it's very important to think about that, because nevertheless it is the best help we can give to developed countries to improve the quality of health in the non-developed countries or less developed countries. So this is very important. Another teaching is the importance of legislative framework. Regulatory barriers must decrease when clinical benefits for patients must increase. So it's difficult to explain that on the two sides, you know. But if we succeed to coordinate those decreases and increases, you know, it will be certainly a big success for everybody, including for the regulatory bodies, you know. Another teaching is that for the first time in the history, I have been very pleased to that, we have seen that the first digital therapy has been reimbursed in France. I hope we'll have more. I have involved personally with different companies working on products which will benefit from those reimbursements. So it's very important, because nevertheless, without payment and financial support, it's very difficult to develop a new technology. I have a pessimistic and optimistic remark. In Europe today, all the diseases have not a specific plan. You know, we have oncology has been always a priority, infectious diseases or other, but some more, I would say, common disease or metabolic diseases have not the same attention than cancer or oncology, so it's very important to develop it. We have been informed today, and we knew since sometimes that the funding available, you know, to take care about it have increased. You know, I don't know if you are calculated. I am always interested by numbers and science, but numbers also. You know, it is a four times increase of the funding from Europe to take care of those problems, you know, so it's really very important in the difficult budgeting time we are, you know, so it's very important, a lot of money. So many very important information, teachings. It will be difficult to digest it. I hope that the politicians or regulatory body or political people listening to us today have heard what we have said, and I hope it will have huge consequences with the financial consequences it has, but I know it's difficult. It will be impossible to do everything immediately, but I think that we are, and perhaps the pandemic we have had is perhaps a good reasons to change how, you know, the things are working between the drug companies, regulatory bodies, patients. You know, I have seen myself a lot of change I had never seen before, and so fast. You know, I'm very surprised to see companies never speaking between them and speaking now. So it's very new. You know, we have today we had all the different actors, you know, from health companies, SME, lawyers, consultants, investors, public sector, foundation, association, clinicians, hospitals, researchers, and I hope that this long chain will help to maximize the impact of this event. This event is organized, you know, by our non-profit organization, HTFC. HTFC will organize another event in October, on October 12th to 14th. It's an important message. Not, you know, the date. It will be important. The name of the event is HTID 4 event. You know, it will be, you know, in Paris also, a European event in Paris, but a European event open to the rest of the world. And we have decided to maximize the communication on what has happened today, to organize a specific roundtable during the October event, which will be dedicated to the conclusion of this event. As this event is a larger event with, I don't know exactly the number, but we'll have certainly more than 1,000 people coming from around the world, sponsored by 20 very large companies, pharma companies with 300 investors, because to to do what we have to do to improve the system, we need companies, private companies, but we need also funding, you know, so it's very important to have, you know, investors who consider they could make some money from what is happening, even if it is a very, very new approach. But I think they are starting to understand. I have been personally a venture capitalist. I'm still a venture capitalist. I have never seen so many projects coming to us in the orphan disease sector, and with a lot of interest from our limited partners, you know. So it's something which is very, very important. So in October, we'll have hundreds of decision makers also. You know, we are sponsored by the European Community, by the French government, and by other governmental bodies, the international organization. So I think it will be very, very important for you to attend and to be there, because we want to maximize what has been said today during this event, to multiply, I would say, the contact and the way we could collaborate and develop that sort of approach. Thank you very much again to have attended. I think it was an important event. I have not seen so many times events with so different people attending. I have always said that richness is coming from differences, and I think it has been proved again today. Thank you again. Thank you to have attended.
Thank you very much indeed, Christian, for this for your word of conclusion. And we wish to express our very special thank you to Marie-Yvonne Hiance.
Thank you, Marie-Yvonne. Without her, nothing will exist.
Absolutely. To Christian Policar and to the board of HealthTech for Care, a very special thank you to you for allowing this and enabling this event to take place. We also wish to thank Anda Alustondo Uruguay at the European Commission, which is, as a representative of the European Commission, of course, this is confirmation of the importance of putting patients at the heart of health innovation today and tomorrow. We also, of course, have to say very special thank you to all of our speakers who have traveled from around the world to share their expertise and elevate our thinking today. This has meant such a lot to have you here with us in Paris. And also, yes, Christian.
And also, don't forget the organizer, the
One
team.
moment.
Oh,
One moment, please.
I never forget the ladies organizing it.
We never forget. And of course, we would also like to share special thank you to Anaïs Le Corvec and to Alan Herrera for having moderated our two very rich roundtables. And naturally, there must be a very big thank you to all our friends here at the Hub Institute here in Paris, who behind the scenes have been allowing this to take place seamlessly, even when we had a pesky fly coming along to say hello. And of course, as Christian rightly says, a huge thank you, tons of thanks to the organizing team from HealthTech for Care. So we're going to name them. This is Nathalie Dunn, Estelle Metzger, Kadia Touba, Solène Goupy, and Marie Guillot, who really have worked seamlessly for many months to enable this event to happen. And of course, we wish to express our deep thanks to everybody from around the world, those 32 countries who have joined us today, here in person or online, to be at this very, very important event for patients. And we are looking forward to seeing you again soon at future HealthTech for Care events, and of course, the next edition of HealthTech for Patients. Until then, take care, have a lovely evening, goodbye.
Goodbye.